السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. أهلا وسهلا بكم في البث 59 حيث أشارككم مذاكرتي. ونقرأ الكتاب الذي بين أيدينا عن عن نظرية المعرفة الإسلامية التحليلية الحديثة، ولكن هذا الفصل فصل تاريخي يعني. Divine freedom meets logical necessity on the relationship between rational speculation and knowledge in Ash'ari foundationalism. Among the introduction المؤلف هي لورا حسن. ماذا تقول لورا حسن؟ تقول الكثير من صفحة 118 لحد 130، يعني 12 صفحة يعني تقريبا. Among the hallmarks of Ash'ari theology is its insistence that divine autonomy is absolute. This is a major impetus behind the wide spectrum of theological commitments held among school members. In ethics, neither God's commands nor his own action are constrained by an objective morality external to him. In the realm of human action, God's freedom is not curtailed by his creatures, since they are free neither to determine nor to create their acts. In nature, God is not constrained by conditions. The existence of the eye is not a condition for the occurrence of vision, nor is the presence of oxygen a condition for the occurrence of combustion. Despite the insistence on God's total freedom, his habitual action is taken to be reliable to the extent that the world is a highly predictable place. Ash'ari's appeal to the constancy of God's habit as a mechanism that secures patterns in life, including the predictability of reward and punishment and the reliability of observation. Recently, the compatibility of an empirical scientific rationalism with an occasionalist metaphysics has been defended in this manner. In this chapter, I will examine a point of intersection between the Ash'ari's doctrine of divine freedom and their epistemological theory of rational speculation, or nazar, leading to knowledge, ilm. Specifically, I present a hitherto under-examined discussion in Abu al-Ma'ali al-Juwayni's Kitab al-Shamil, in which he responds to a claim made by his teacher Abu Ishaq al-Isfarayini concerning the possibility for discursive knowledge being acquired in the absence of nazar. I will demonstrate that the formulation of the relationship between nazar and ilm maintained by some later Ash'aris, including Abd al-Din al-Iji, is discontinuous with discussions among these earlier Ash'ari practitioners. The evidence of disagreement between Ash'ari epistemologies provide a realistic picture of the evolution within a tradition which spans many centuries. This is a corrective to more essentializing depictions of Ash'ari rationalism. I will also advance the argument that the disagreement over the relationship between Nadar and Ilm reveals that the notion of God's habit is not sufficient to secure a foundationalist epistemology. In order for reasoning to succeed, God's action in creating knowledge subsequent to reasoning must be determined by logical necessity. This turns out to be the sole constraint within the Ash'ari universe on God's otherwise unrestricted freedom. I will show that Al-Juwayni implicitly recognized logical necessity as precisely such a limitation and conclude that this is entirely consistent with the second great impetus behind Ash'ari theology, namely the conviction that God is knowable supremely via logical reasoning. Nadar as an apparent cause, يعني سبب ظاهري of knowledge. The essential philosophical problem treated in this chapter is whether sound reasoning has any necessary connection with the knowledge that it succeeds. That succeeds it. In his monograph on theories of causality in the Islamic tradition, Osgur Koga has advanced the following claim. Ash'aris do not see a necessary relationship between contemplation and knowledge. God can create knowledge without contemplation. The relationship is one of proximity. God could also choose not to create knowledge despite the existence of contemplation. Contemplation does not necessarily generate knowledge. Thus, causal cognitive relations are also possible. Possible in the sense of contingent, I guess. Koga's reading appears to be accurate for certain later Ash'aris. In his commentary on the Maturidi scholar Abu Hafs al-Nasafi, Al-Aqaid al-Nasafiyya, for example, Sa'd al-Din al-Taftazani discusses epistemic sources under al-Nasafi's heading The Means of Knowledge. Here, al-Taftazani's simple distinction between apparent and external means or external means and the sole effective means, that is, the ontological cause of knowledge and of everything, appears to set his epistemology entirely within the terms set out by Koga. Note that Al-Taftazani is known to endorse a broad Sunnism inclusive of certain Maturidi positions. The term sabab can be translated as occasion, means, or cause. The appropriate term depends on the notion of causality evoked, as demonstrated by Al-Taftazani's distinction. The causally effective means of all knowledge is God. May he be exalted, writes Al-Taftazani, and the apparent means, like the fire to burning, is the intellect. Al-E.G. prefigures this with the summary articulation of the position which he identifies as that of the Shaykh, namely that Nadar produces knowledge by God's habit on the basis that all possibles contingents depend in their origination upon God, exalted may he be. It is indeed true of all classical Ash'aris that they deny that contemplation is a cause of knowledge, and in fact the secondary generation of effects absolutely. However, although Koga derives evidence of this formulation of the relationship between Nadar and Ilm from discussions present in Al-Baqillani's Kitab al-Tamhid and Al-Juwayni's Kitab al-Shamil, he appears to overlook important nuances over how that relationship should be defined. In the following discussion, I will revisit Al-Juwayni's Kitab al-Shamil in particular in order to highlight two matters. Firstly, I emphasize the fact that classical Ash'aris endorse the reality of logical necessity, and that this is crucial to the school's rationality. Secondly, I demonstrate that neither Al-Juwayni nor Al-Baqillani endorse the theory of mere proximity between نظر and علم. هي كلمة proximity مش مناسبة. Correlation كلمة أنسب. This is to say that despite their commitment to the exclusivity of God's power, they did not sever the metaphysically necessary connection between God's creation of sound reasoning together with his creation of knowledge. Al-Juwayni on the Nazar-Ilm relationship. Al-Juwayni's Kitab al-Irshad offers us a précis of his position on the relationship between rational speculation and knowledge, while the extant parts of the discussion of Nazar in his Kitab al-Shamil grants us access to the broader theoretical landscape within which he formulated his position. The two works were written alongside one another. The Irshad, a shorter manual, the Shamil, an extensive and eponymously comprehensive summa of Kalam, which is styled as a commentary on the thought of the Qadi al-Baqillani. Al-Juwayni, entirely in keeping with the understanding of al-Baqillani, is very clear in these works that all human knowledge is the direct creation of God, yet we shall see that Koga's claim that Ash'ari epistemology functions within an entirely contingent universe is challenged by al-Juwayni's expression of the imperative for logical necessity. Nazar does not cause knowledge. The terminology used by Al-Juwayni when discussing the results of sound reasoning captured the tension between the theological imperative of preserving God's exclusive creative freedom and the rational imperative that sound reasoning reliably produces knowledge. Al-Juwayni uses a variety of expressions. He writes that reasoning contains or entails knowledge if it is sound. That sound nazar leads to or arrives at knowledge, and that by reasoning knowledge occurs. If in explanation of his notion of tadammun, he writes that he means that if reasoning is sound, the establishment of knowledge becomes rationally certain. Each of these expressions is carefully chosen to avoid the assertion of a direct causal relation between nazar and ilm. Yet each term also expresses the connection between the existence of nazar and the knowledge which succeeds it. It is unclear from the expressions themselves whether this connection is, to Al-Juwayni's mind, one of causal necessity. Thankfully, he treats the question in some detail. Few ontological categories are available to the classical Ash'aris. Al-Juwayni readily excludes the following configuration for the reasoning-knowledge relationship. Reasoning as a secondary cause of knowledge. Al-Juwayni rejects the Mu'tazili belief that secondary generation provides the connection between reasoning and knowledge. Reasoning is a determinant of knowledge. Al-Juwayni denies that nada is a determinant of knowledge. He writes, reasoning does not generate knowledge, and neither does it necessitate it, as the necessitation of the determinant constitutes effect. لا يولد النظر العلم ولا يوجبه إيجاب العلة معلولها. The category of determinant is eliminated on the basis that it can only exist contemporaneously with its effect, as in the case of knowledge as determinant of its substrate being knowing. Reasoning as a condition of knowledge. In the Shamil, Al-Juwayni ascribes this position to Al-Baqillani, writing of him that he maintained that in the case of anything which depends upon a certain thing X for its establishment, كل ما يتوقف ثبوته على أمر yet X is not a necessitating cause for it. X is a condition of it. The prime example of a condition established among classical Ash'aris is life as a condition of the presence of knowledge or ignorance. A criticism recorded by Al-Juwayni is that conditions must occur contemporaneously with that of which they are a condition. Yet the numerous created accidents of reasoning involved in the formulation of a proof are temporally prior to the created accidents of knowledge with which they are associated. Al-Juwayni's solution, as settled upon in the Irshad, is to assert that in the presence of sound nada, the establishment of knowledge is inevitable without one being the cause of the other. من غير أن يوجب أحدهما الثاني أو يوجده أو يولده. This he likens to the relationship between volition and knowledge. It is not possible to will something without knowledge of the object of volition. It is not possible to will something without knowledge of the object of volition, yet the mutual entailment one of the other does not demand that one is the creator, necessitator, or secondary cause of the other. This he likens the mutual entailment of one of the other. تلازمهما does not demand that one is the creator, necessitator, or secondary cause of the other. This is a bad example, I believe. Al-Juwayni secures this understanding of the Nadar ilmi relationship by identifying the precise ontological locus of concomitance between the two. Suhayyara Siddiqi has insightfully analyzed Al-Juwayni's epistemology, emphasizing its implications in the domain of jurisprudence. She has shown in her analysis of the Shamil that Al-Juwayni isolates a specific aspect of a given proof as that which entails knowledge. Our knowledge of this aspect of the proof exists simultaneously with the knowledge acquired by it. There may be a multi-step reasoning process consisting in a number of accidents of reasoning prior to the acquisition of this specific aspect, but it is this final accident of reasoning which exists simultaneously with the object of proof. In isolating an aspect of the proof as that which entails knowledge, Al-Juwayni is able to reconcile the notion of logical necessity already found in Al-Baqillani with the Ash'ari ontology of accidents. For his part, Al-Baqillani drew a clear distinction between the multi-step process of reasoning and the kinds of logical necessity which connect reasoning with knowledge. The former he writes as described as dalil only loosely. اتساءً It is the latter which secure knowledge. Al-Baqillani enumerates several relations that constitute dalil, including, for instance, that between word and referent, and the fact that there are determinants or grounds for observable states. مش فاهم. The determinant cause is a crucial ontological category for early Ash'ari epistemology. Created accidents are understood to be determinants of the attributes of objects. These accidents are themselves always the direct creation of gods. Their causal efficacy is extremely limited. They have no influence on anything besides the atom in which they inhere, nor beyond the atomic moment in which they exist. Yet it is this ontological illah and not God which directly and necessarily determines the way things are. Without this minor concession to metaphysical necessity, Ash'ari rationality would fall. In order for anything to be knowable, there must be a fixity in the world. This fixity is divinely created in the form of determinants, including accidents, securing our ability to infer information from observable particulars. For instance, we can infer that all knowing beings possess knowledge because it is the accident of knowledge that determines that its substrate is knowing. Without inference, nothing can be known about the unobservable realm, making knowledge of God as the Ash'aris pursued it impossible. Note that the logical and ontological illah are not identical. Indeed, Al-Juwayni is scathing of those who falsely equate the epistemological dalil with the ontological illah, thereby maintaining the convertibility of rational evidence. Van Es has also pointed out that the terminological ambiguity surrounding the illah. Nevertheless, without ontological determinants, logical reasons could not occur. Thus, the illah can be understood as a divinely created form of metaphysical necessity that secures logical necessity. Al-Juwayni's aspect of the proof is the precise logical relation uncovered by the process of reasoning already described by al-Baqillani. Al-Juwayni can reconcile this notion of logical necessity with the ontology of accidents through a theory which he defends elsewhere, namely that one created accident of knowledge can be related to two separate objects of knowledge. In this case, the wajh al-dalil and its associated madlul are two objects of knowledge for which only a single accident is created by God. Thus, as he puts it, the knowledge of the aspect of the proof is knowledge of that which is indicated. The editor of Abu al-Qasim al-Ansari al-Ghunya في الكلام neatly expresses هو كاتب هامش طويل نقرأ. Siddiqui has held that Al-Juwayni is the first to insist that there is necessity in the relationship between Dalil and Dalil. She argued that Al-Baqillani contrasts innate and other kinds of necessary knowledge with knowledge acquired through reasoning, which is merely epistemically probable. Drawing evidence for this from a passage in which Al-Baqillani discusses obstacles to sound reasoning, Siddiqui has also cited the passage from the Tamheed discussed above, in which Al-Baqillani enumerates the types of istidlal, but I do not find reference to the probabilistic nature of acquired knowledge. There it appears that Siddiqui may have conflated Al-Baqillani's acknowledgement that reasoning can be faulty with the metaphysical notion that Dalil and Madlul are not necessarily connected. The latter belief, which is foreign to Al-Baqillani's way of thinking, although he acknowledges that some matter being faulty leads the reasoner to sophisms rather than Dalil, and therefore to ignorance. This does not render the relationship between Dalil when it is obtained and Madlul a contingent one. The editor of Abu al-Qasim al-Ansari's Al-Ghunya fi al-Kalam neatly expresses the position that Al-Ansari shares with his teacher Al-Juwayni. The existence of a Dalil which does not indicate its Madlul is inconceivable, for there is no meaning to Dalil save that which entails a knowledge of its Madlul. Interestingly, the position that one created accident of knowledge can be associated with two objects is reported to be a minority position among Ash'ari theologians, with Al-Baqillani and Al-Juwayni being two key proponents. One motivating factor for Al-Juwayni in advancing this theory may be the need to reconcile the doctrine of God's creation of accidents with their belief. When we discover genuine proof, we obtain knowledge by necessity. More generally, the notion responds to the realization that some knowledge items are inseparable one from the other. Our knowledge of X, for instance, is impossible in the absence of our knowledge of X. Within a somewhat confining ontology, Al-Juwayni is able in this way to maintain the reality of logical necessity without in any way compromising God's exclusive agency as the cause of knowledge. Knowledge must be acquired subsequent to sound reasoning. It should be clear seems to be a natural progression from Al-Juwayni's implicit distinction between the reasoning process and the logical relations, which are what necessitate knowledge already, such as in the sense of Al-Jadisha that has demonstrated frequently solutions of ultimately or received with its should be clear by this point that Al-Juwayni does not conceive of the relationship between sound reasoning and knowledge as one of pure contingency, dependent entirely on God's effort, as seems to be the position of Al-Iji at least. Dispute that Al-Juwayni entertains with Al-Isfaraini allows us to relate Al-Juwayni's beliefs concerning logical necessity more comprehensively to his theory of God's creation of knowledge. The relevant discussion is over the question of whether items of discursive knowledge can be obtained without a preceding accident of nadar. The answer corresponds to two possible positions on the relationship between God's creation of the act of reasoning and his creation of the accident of knowledge as follows. Position 1. God creates an accident of power by which the person acquires the accident of reasoning, but also created by God. Subsequently, God creates an accident of power by which the person acquires the accident of knowledge, also created by God. Position 2. God creates an accident of power by which the person acquires the accident of reasoning, also created by God. Subsequently, God creates an accident of knowledge. Position 1, which Al-Juwayni ascribes to the majority of the rightly minded, makes discursive knowledge the acquisition of the reasoner. According to the second position, knowledge items which occur after reasoning occur necessarily in accordance with certain causes, yet the establishment of these knowledge items the establishment of these knowledge items is not conditioned upon the preceding existence of these causes, rather God's custom determines this, just as it determines all causes. This specific dispute then concerns the relationship between the accident Assalamu alaikum. Thank you, my friend. This specific dispute then concerns the relationship between the accident of reasoning and the subsequent knowledge. Al-Juwayni agrees with other school members that knowledge, like reasoning, is an acquisition of the reasoner. This does not add much to what we have already learned about Al-Juwayni's denial that reasoning is the cause of knowledge. It is in his subsequent discussion of this point that Al-Juwayni's difference with Al-Isfaraini emerges. He writes, acquired discursive knowledge which is sought through proofs cannot be established on the assumption that it occurs as an object of acquired power without the creation of power for nadar. ما معنى هذا الكلام؟ العلم المقدور المستدل عليه المطلوب بالأدلة cannot be established on the assumption that it occurs as an object of acquired power without the creation of power for another. ماشي. This he describes as a majority position among the متكلمون, including al-Baqillani, but he singles out al-Isfaraini as having maintained that acquired discursive knowledge may be established as an object of power without the precedence of reasoning. Richard M. Frank has edited relevant portions of al-Juwayni's Kitab al-Shamil and treated this passage in passing in his excellent study on the foundations of religious belief among the classical Ash'aris. There he has held that the discussion of whether or not acquired knowledge may occur without preceding reasoning pertains to a difference of view concerning how the knowledge of the truth of the conclusion follows from the reasoning. But he has written that the matter is too complex to go into here. Frank has also claimed in the course of the study that for al-Juwayni, despite his insistence on the religious imperative of reasoning in arriving at knowledge of God, this is not to say that God cannot cause a person to have such knowledge without his having performed any antecedent reasoning, but only in the fact that he normally does not. It is indeed that al-Juwayni is committed to occasionalism, and that he therefore maintains that God could directly create knowledge, which is normally an acquisition of human power, with no associated accident of power. However, al-Juwayni clearly and repeatedly denies that God could create this kind of knowledge as an object of power with an associated accident of qudra, but without the precedence of an act as accident of another. The table below illustrates this point. T represents an atomic moment. Creation of accident of capacity plus creation of associated accident of reasoning. Time 2. Creation of accident of capacity plus creation of associated item of knowledge. Is this scenario possible? Yes. Does this regularly occur by God's custom? Yes. Scenario 2. No related accident created. Time 2. Direct creation accident of knowledge normally acquired through reason. Is this scenario possible? Yes. Does this occur regularly by God's custom? No. Scenario 3. No related accident created. Time 2. Creation of accident of capacity. Creation of associated item of knowledge. Despite the fact that al-Juwayni family maintains that all knowledge is at all times the creation of God, he also maintains that it is metaphysically impossible for a human to acquire knowledge as an object of God-given capacity where reasoning does not occur. This is because of the reality of logical necessity. Al-Juwayni argues for the metaphysical impossibility of the acquisition of knowledge in the absence of another 3 times in the extant portions of the Shamil. In the first passage, Al-Juwayni argues against al-Isfaraini as follows. Argument A. Nazar is connected with knowledge. It is impossible that sound nazar is obtained and that an action of ignorance follows. Just as sound nazar cannot be followed by ignorance, it is not possible for acquired knowledge to occur without a preceding act of nazar. If acquired knowledge, argument B, if acquired knowledge could occur without proof, this would cause our arguments against imitated to fail if we allow the obtainment of knowledge as an object of power without proof. What prevents the belief of the muqallid being defined as knowledge? Another passage that also appears among Frank's collated extracts concerns the distinct but closely related question of whether knowledge which is normally immediate can be created as an object of power. Al-Juwayni's conclusions here are entirely consistent with the arguments above and again place him in opposition to his reported view of al-Isfaraini. Al-Juwayni maintains that items of immediate knowledge which are part of the constitution of a sound intellect, for instance, my knowledge of my own existence, can never be objects of power. Immediate knowledge which is not constitutive of sound intellect may be acquired. Yet Al-Juwayni insists against al-Isfaraini that it must be preceded by proof in order to be considered an acquisition of the human. This is not because human reasoning has any causal efficacy in relation to the knowledge acquired. Indeed, Al-Juwayni clearly insists in the channel that an accident power associated with the acquired knowledge has no causal efficacy in relation to that knowledge. It is rather impossible for knowledge which is normally immediate to be acquired in the absence of proof. For the same reason that it is impossible for knowledge which is normally acquired by proof to be acquired in the absence of proof. This is because it undermines the whole basis of Ash'ari rationality, since Al-Juwayni asks again, how do you know that the muqallid does not in fact know? From Al-Juwayni, on page 89, he states that since man is commanded to know God and can only be commanded to do something which is an object of his power, human knowledge of God must be acquired as an object of power. From Al-Juwayni's point of view, if knowledge can be acquired without reasoning, reasoning cannot be said to entail knowledge, and if reasoning does not entail knowledge, the Ash'ari insistence on reasoning over mere imitation is groundless. Al-Juwayni, for all his commitment to the doctrine of divine freedom, acknowledges a restriction on the exercise of God's power in order to secure his foundationalist rationalism. For if God cannot cause a human to acquire knowledge without also creating reasoning, that is, if he cannot create for the human being an acquisition of knowledge of the madlul without simultaneously creating an acquisition of knowledge of the wajh al-dalil, then there is a course of action which is impossible for God. Even on the understanding that a single created accident of knowledge has as its objects both wajh al-dalil and madlul, and indeed that the very definition of the former demands its occurrence and identification with the latter. Al-Juwayni realizes that accidents of nadar must also be created. This is because the wajh al-dalil is part of both the reasoning process and the resultant knowledge. Thus, it is inconceivable that the creation of acquired knowledge can occur without prior creation of nadar. Furthermore, this inconceivability refers to a metaphysical impossibility. If God is to be rationally known, he cannot interfere in the efficacy of sound reasoning, either by failing to create knowledge in its wake, or by creating human capacity to acquire knowledge without prior reasoning. This gives primacy to rationality in a manner that befits the epistemic confidence of the Ash'aris. Relationships of logical necessity demand the metaphysical necessity that God creates sound reasoning together with the knowledge that results. There is a crucial parallel there is a crucial parallel context which has recently received revived scholarly interest. In Al-Juwayni's later work, Al-Aqeedah Al-Nidamiyya, Al-Juwayni expresses the position that it must be the case that God's created capacity is the cause of the human act. For the purposes of this chapter, it is worth noting the particular motivating factor in Al-Juwayni's concession to this point. This is the imperative for the obligation imposed by God to be meaningful. The reason that it is inconceivable for the power of the agent to be unrelated to his acts is precisely that this would nullify the demands of the law. Nevertheless, Al-Juwayni strongly distinguishes his view from that of the Mu'tazila by arguing that God remains ultimately responsible for the act, both in his creation of the capacity to enact it and in his volition, which determines those capacities that he creates. This position in the Aqeedah is strongly related to Al-Juwayni's disagreement with the Al-Asfaraini, as recorded in the Shamil. In both cases, it is the demands of the law that are in the background of the Juwayni's admission of admission of minimal pockets of necessity. If humans are warned against unreasoned belief, there must be a way to guarantee the efficacy of reason. If humans are commanded to worship, there must be a way to guarantee the efficacy of the human in the act of worship. Otherwise, the task of the rational theologian and jurist loses its purpose. Conclusion. Al-Juwayni's denial of God's power to create acquired knowledge within his creatures without an associated accident of reason is more than a technicality concerning the mechanism of knowledge production. His insistence on the presence of reasoning in the process of knowledge acquisition absolutely befits the elevated status given by the Mutakallimun to human reason in the search for knowledge of God. Ash'ari foundationalism places enormous confidence in the capacity of human reason to obtain knowledge about the nature of the unseen, yet some Ash'aris including Al-Asfaraini and later Al-Iji, insisted on a metaphysics which attempted simultaneously to eliminate all necessity from the created order. Even in the process of knowledge acquisition, it turns out that these two major concerns may really be incompatible. The elimination of all necessity makes it impossible to reliably establish knowledge of divine freedom. Classical Ash'aris, including Al-Juwayni, held to an epistemology that admitted the imperative for a necessity within the system. For God to be known at all, they realized his creation of sound reasoning together with acquired knowledge must be a metaphysical certainty beyond the reliability of his habits. نكمل. Mass transmission of prophetic miracles in the contemplation and proof of core creed. Introduction. Theologians often think أنا تعبت أنا عايز أسمع بقى مش قادر أقرأ. موضوع صعب. Theologians often think.
Witnessing events from the liminal world of the grave, Theologians often think that the purpose of theology is to demonstrate the core tenets of faith to another who has yet to believe. Others, however, may consider it primarily defensive and apologetic, providing its practitioner with proof against doubt, or with a weapon against a challenger. The first conception of theology speaks to the question of what plants faith in the heart. The second speaks to the question of what ensures that faith remains in the heart of one who already believes. Furthermore, regardless of whether this faith will remain or be prone to wavering or disappearing, the question of whether one must be able to produce proofs for one's belief and thereby establish its salvific validity has complicated the question of theology's purpose. If theology proves faith to the non-believer and buttresses or saves faith for the wavering believer, why must the firm believer learn theological proofs, and what is at stake if said firm believer fails to learn to express their faith evidentially? Further still, what if the effort to learn such proofs leads to wavering and skepticism rather than a firm footing and certainty? The late Ashar Kalam tradition, as laid out in popular introductory and intermediate madrasa textbooks, often presents what we might call the modified Sanusian view of Islamic theology. It plants the seed of faith in the non-believer, buttresses the faith of the believer, and absolves the believer of the sin of unverified adherence, taqlid. It is modified because it labels the adherent, muqallid, sinful and at risk of wavering faith, but not a disbeliever, as was Muhammad ibn al-Sanusi's, d. 895/1490, view. Also, this 100, regardless of what is at stake for the uncritical adherent in the afterlife. How one exits from the status of being an uncritical adherent, muqallid, is usually charted as a series of proofs beginning with the demonstrative proof, burhan, for God's existence, followed by the attributes of negation, al-ift al-salbiyya, and then the attributes of meaning, ift al-man. Next, the Prophet's attributes are laid out as either textual Next, the Prophet's attributes are laid out as either textual or rational proofs, and at the tail end of the discussion mention is made that miracles entail divine confirmation of the truthfulness of the messengers. I call this the Sanusian ordering of proofs, and one finds it explicitly laid out in al-Sanusi's Kalam works, as well as in versified summaries, such as the Murshid al-Mun of Abd al-Wid ibn Ahmad ibn Shir, d. 1040/1631, and Jaharat al-Taht of Ibrahim al-Lakhani, d. 1041/1631. This chapter, however, treats an alternative path to membership in the community of reflective evidentialists, al-Nar wal-Istidlal, who have left uncritical adherence and shored up their faith against doubt through rational means that do not, however, arise from an ability to produce logically ordered proofs for God's existence and other attributes. Through an analysis of three verifiers, Muwaqqi'in, of the late Ashar tradition, Sad al-Din al-Taftazani, d. 793/1390, Audit al-Din Alaji, d. 756/1355, and Al-Sayyid al-Sharif al-Jurjani, d. 816/1413, I argue that such scholars maintain the rationalist foundation of Quran-based faith through the epistemological channel of mass transmission coupled with the rationalist proof of prophetic truthfulness. In doing so, such scholars thereby considered any believer who was incapable of providing rationally demonstrable propositions that prove God's existence and necessary attributes to be free of the sin of uncritical adherence. Obtaining the salvific root of faith, al-iman, and meeting the obligation to know Allah, wujub al-marifa. Before exploring the question of establishing mass transmission's efficacy in exiting one from uncritical adherence and entering one into the community of reflective evidentialists, we must first distinguish between two matters: proofs that bring one from non-belief to belief and proofs that bring one from belief based on uncritical adherence to belief rooted in rational reflection and evidence. Identifying the initial state of the one. This whom the proofs are intended to convince helps distinguish which proofs are required in a given context and, by extension, whether those proofs are necessary for one to know and express. The dominant opinion found in standard Ashar theological handbooks is that the first obligation of the morally accountable person, al-mukallaf, is to know God, wujub al-marifa. Discussions around this obligation are often centered on whether this obligation is upon every rational adult, regardless of whether they have been reached by the message of the prophet of their time, or whether the obligation is only on those who have been reached by the prophet of their time. The former opinion is attributed to the Mu'tazil and Maturidi. Discussions around this obligation are often centered on whether this obligation is upon every rational adult, regardless of whether they have been reached by the message of the prophet of their time, or whether the obligation is only on those who have been reached by the prophet of their time. The former opinion is attributed to the Mu'tazil and Maturidi schools, and the latter is attributed to the Ashar school. Regardless of the salvific aspect of this obligation, what is of primary importance for the investigation at hand is to know through which epistemological channel knowledge of God is realized. Three categories of tenets based on epistemological channels. Al-Sanusi, Abu al-Mali al-Juwayni, d. 478/1085, and others give a tripartite division of points of creed according to the epistemological channels through which they are made known. Understanding these categories of tenets is important as the efficacy of their epistemological channels differs according to whether we are considering the movement from non-belief to belief, or the movement from belief based on uncritical adherence of narration to evidentialist belief based on rational reflection. Drawing from al-Sanusi's comment 6, that is, whether reason alone or revelation alone is sufficient to produce the root of faith in the non-believer or to produce reasoned evidentialist faith in the uncritical adherent will differ according to each category. Reason alone is all that is sufficient to produce belief in God's existence for the non-believer, and revelation is not sufficient if the veracity of a prophet has not yet been determined. Revelation alone is sufficient regarding belief in the origination of the universe for one who has already affirmed the veracity of a prophet. This content downloaded from these points of creed, drawing from al-Sanusi's commentary on his Al-Aqda al-Kubra, with explanatory commentary drawn from other sources. The epistemological channels are as follows. 1. Tenets rooted in rationality, aql. These tenets can only be proven by means of absolutely certain rational proofs, dalil aqlka. These points of creed are those on which the establishment of miracles are based, namely, God's existence, beginningless eternally, endless eternally, power, will, knowledge and life. Were one to attempt to establish belief in these attributes by revelation alone, it would 6. Entail circular reasoning. One cannot say God exists because the Quran says God said that he exists, when it has not yet been proven that the divine source of the Quran exists. The above-mentioned points of creed may only be established via the epistemological channel of reason. In justifying his claim that theology, Ilm al-Kalam, is the foundation of foundational sources. Aziz al-Aziz, Ibrahim al-Bajuri, d. 1276-1860, lays out a chain of foundational dependencies in his gloss on al-Taftazani's commentary on the Creed of al-Nasafi. The above-mentioned points of creed may only be established via the epistemology. In justifying his claim that theology, Ilm al-Kalam, is the foundation of foundational sources, Aziz al-Aziz, Ibrahim al-Bajuri, d. 1276-1860, lays out a chain of foundational dependencies in his gloss on al-Taftazani's commentary on the Creed of al-Nasafi. Knowledge connected with legal rulings is derived from the Quran and Hadith, which are dependent on the truthfulness of the messenger, Idq al-Rasul, which is known from the miracles reported of him, which are considered God's affirmation of the prophet's claim and can only be produced by one who has the attributes of power, knowledge, will, life and so on, and the existence of such a being possessing of these attributes is only known via the science of God's oneness and attributes, that is, Kalam. According to scholars writing in the Sanusian tradition, the root of faith can only be acquired through rational. I have maintained the tone of the original Arabic, despite its awkward grammatical quality in English, in order to keep the sense of connectedness between each link that serves as the foundation for the next. The science of Islamic theology is the foundation of knowledge of the Quran and Hadith, which are the foundational sources for all ethical and theological teachings. As such, it is the foundation of the foundation. According to scholars writing in the Sanusian tradition, the root of faith can only be acquired through rational reflection and proof. The first half of the testification of faith, that there is no God but God, is acquired through a composite of contemplation of the universe's temporal origination and dependency on a creator, Dalil al-Udh, its contingency on a necessary being, Dalil al-Imkan, who ensures its perfect order and design, Dalil al-Nim, and others. While the second half of the testification of faith, that Muhammad is the messenger of God, is acquired through contemplation of the contingency of prophetic miracles on the Creator's willful response to prophetic claims via his creative act. Both parts of the testimony of faith, when viewed from the perspective of someone witnessing a prophetic miracle, are grounded in observing the natural world, both its predictable patterns and miraculous interruptions in causality, see below, and reasoning from these to the existence of the Creator, who validates the truthfulness of his messenger. After this affirmation, it then becomes clear that, according to some of the scholars discussed later, all other points of faith may be taken directly from revelation, which is the second category of creed listed below. There is some discussion as to whether one must first reason to the Creator's existence and then reason to the veracity of the messengers. Some have argued that both tenets, existence of God and truthfulness of the messenger, are delivered simultaneously by the miraculous proofs for the veracity of the messengers. Some have argued that both tenets, existence of God and, nevertheless, the language of al-Bajuri and others writing in the Sanusian tradition prioritizes proofs for the Creator, followed by proofs for the veracity of the messengers. 2. Tenets rooted in reported and revealed knowledge, Naqli. The second category of creedal tenets as laid out by al-Juwayni and al-Sanusi are those that can only be obtained by means of revelation, al-Sam or al-Naqli, since in these matters the intellect can merely judge them to be rationally possible. Their actual occurrence can only be known through reported evidentiary knowledge, or what Abu of al-Nasafi, d. 537/1142, al-Taftazani and others call the truthful report, Their actual occurrence can only be known through reported evidentiary knowledge, or what Abu of al-Nasafi, D 537/1142, al-Taftazani and others call the truthful report, al-Kabar al-Dike, or the report of the truthful one, Kabar al-Dike. Examples include matters related to the afterlife such as resurrection, the questioning angels in the grave, the bridge over hell, the scale of deeds, reward, punishment, heaven and hell. With the intellect having affirmed the rational possibility of such matters and then engaged only in the domain of clarification and interpretation of these points of creed thereafter. With the intellect having affirmed the rational possibility of such matters and then engaged only in the domain of clarification and interpretation.
صالح الغرفي ده.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين، والصلاة والسلام على سيدنا محمد سيد الأولين والآخرين. اللهم علمنا ما ينفعنا وانفعنا بما علمتنا وزدنا علما والحقنا بعبادك الصالحين. بعد أن نشرت تسجيلا عن الشيخ محمد صالح الغرسي حفظه الله، وانتقدت بعض ما جاء في كتبه ومتاجرة بعض الوهابية بهذا، وأن الرجل قد تراجع عن معتقد الأشعرية وكذا وكذا. كذلك كنت قد استمعت منه كلاما في قضية الإمام الأشعري، وقال إن الإمام الأشعري مذهبه هو الإثبات. نشرت هذا الكلام وخالفت فيه وقلت إنه لا يمثل الأشعرية في هذه الجزئية. اتصل فضيلته قبل قليل، قبل دقائق أو ربع ساعة، اتصالا مطولا. في البداية أشكره على حسن الخلق وعلى الحكمة في التعامل وعدم الرد البعيد وكذا، لأن اللقاء يوضح المسائل. أفاض في اتصال مطول وبين أنه يقصد بالإثبات نوعين، واحد محمود والثاني مذموم، فيقول باللفظ إثبات يؤدي إلى التفويض فهذا هو المطلوب، وإثبات يؤدي إلى التجسيم فهذا مرفوض، وينفي نفيا تاما أن تكون اليد أو الرجل والألفاظ الموهمة للتشبيه، ينفي أن يكون ظاهرها صفات لله سبحانه وتعالى. وقال إنه قد خالف بعض الأشعرية في بعض جزئيات التأويل من أمثال هذا، وقوله إنهم وافقوا المعتزلة في بعض الجزئيات هذا هو مقصده. أما هو بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. توضيح عاجل ومهم جدا بشأن فضيلة الشيخ محمد صالح الغرسي. يبدو أن فضيلته قد اطلع على المقطع الذي نشرناه، فاتصل اتصالا مطولا وبين موقفه، وأنه يرد على الوهابية، وأنه لا يقصد المعنى القبيح الذي قالوه.
Allah. انا مش عارف اقول ايه. لا اله الا الله. كيف نبدأ؟ ماذا نكتب؟ تعالوا نفتح كتاب فيه كتاب فدالي قد يعنا على ابتكار مقدمة، وكتاب تاريخ الإبستمولوجيا. الكتاب لن يساعد. طيب في كتاب تاني في بالي أظن يكفي كذا كما قبل.